What if everything you learned in school about man landing on the moon was a well-rehearsed lie? What if NASA, the world's most powerful space agency, was hiding something that should never be revealed? What you see today could completely change your view of history. Since 1969, we have been bombarded with images of the moon landing. Astronauts walking on unexplored land, an American flag fluttering in an environment where there should be no wind. But something doesn't add up. There are mysteries, inconsistencies, and hidden facts that NASA has never managed to explain convincingly. The space race was one of the most bitter battles of the Cold War. The United States desperately needed to prove its supremacy over the Soviet Union. And the world watched, open-mouthed, at a feat that seemed impossible at the time. But did 1960s technology really allow this feat? Or was it all just a big, televised spectacle designed to deceive millions of people around the planet? Imagine for a moment a secret studio, strategically placed lights, high-definition cameras, capturing every movement, and a select group of people within NASA engineering one of the biggest hoaxes in history. Could it be possible that the iconic Apollo 11 mission was recorded in a hidden location, away from the public eye? After all, why didn't we ever go back to the moon? More than 50 years ago, we managed to land on Earth's natural satellite. Why? Has no other manned mission been sent there since then? Does NASA really want us to believe that we have lost the knowledge to repeat this feat? And most intriguingly, why do some astronauts, including Buzz Aldrin, show signs of discomfort? When asked about landing, there are video records that show strange reactions, averted glances, and even moments of fury when pressed on the subject. Is there a secret so big that it cannot be revealed? Today, we will analyze the facts, compare the evidence, and question the official version. If NASA is hiding something, we'll find out. Are you ready to know the truth behind humanity's greatest achievement? So keep watching, because what comes next could change everything you believe about space exploration. But before we dive deeper into this mystery, I need you to do something very important. This content may be some of the most revealing you've ever watched. And as you know, certain information doesn't always remain available for long. So, if you want to continue discovering NASA's hidden secrets, leave your like right now so that this video reaches more people, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss any revelations that can be deleted from the internet at any time. What we are about to analyze is not just another conspiracy theory. These are facts, evidence, and contradictions that NASA avoids directly responding to. If there's something they don't want you to know, why not question it? Knowledge is power. And staying informed about the true nature of space exploration may be much more important than you realize. After all, if the truth about man's arrival on the moon was hidden, what else could be being hidden? Are there secret missions? Contact with extraterrestrial life? Bases outside of Earth? And most alarmingly, could the entire narrative of space exploration as we know it be compromised? Stay until the end, because throughout this video, we will analyze evidence, testimonies, and documents that may shock you. This is not just any doubt. Humanity's greatest achievement was fabricated. What does that mean for everything we believe in? Get ready for an investigation that could change your perception of history. The truth may be right before our eyes. But are we ready to see it? The history of space exploration cannot be told without mentioning the Cold War, one of humanity's most tense and strategic periods. At the height of the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, the dispute was not limited only to political and military ideologies, but also to the dominance of space. The world was divided between two large blocs, and victory in this field meant not only technological superiority, but also absolute power over the global narrative. And it was in this scenario that NASA was born and became the key player in a geopolitical game that crossed borders. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite in history. a devastating blow for the United States, which saw its biggest rival take the lead in the space race. A few years later, the USSR shocked the world again by sending Yuri Gagarin into space, making him the first human being to orbit the Earth. Each Soviet victory was a severe blow to the American ego and, more than that, a direct threat to the United States' status as a world leader. The fear was not just losing prestige, but what this technological supremacy could mean in a possible armed conflict. After all, if the Soviets could put a man in space, what was to stop them from launching nuclear weapons directly from Earth? Orbit, faced with this desperate scenario, the United States needed to react. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy took the stage and made an audacious promise. The U.S. would land a man on the moon and bring him back safely before the end of the decade. But this wasn't just an ambitious statement. It was a war strategy, an ultimatum to the world that the United States would not only keep up with the Soviets, but overwhelmingly surpass them. NASA, which until then was just a young space agency, became the American government's top priority. Billion-dollar budgets were directed to the Apollo program. Thousands of scientists were recruited, and a veritable propaganda machine was set up to ensure that the population believed that the impossible was about to happen. However, there was a problem. Technology at the time was extremely limited. Computers filled entire rooms and had a fraction of the processing power of a simple, modern smartphone. The materials available to build rockets were unstable, and calculations had to be done by hand. Astronauts faced brutal training where any mistake could be fatal. But despite all these difficulties, the United States claimed to be advancing rapidly towards the moon. The urgency was so great that many questioned whether there really was enough time to achieve this feat in a legitimate way. After all, at the beginning of the decade, NASA was barely able to carry out simple orbital missions, and now it was promising a safe landing on the moon in less than 10 years. This raises a crucial question. Was it really possible, or was something bigger being planned behind the scenes? The United States knew it could not fail. A defeat for the Soviets would mean worldwide humiliation and the loss of confidence among their own population. The media was focused on NASA, and any mistake could be devastating. It was then that rumors began to emerge that the solution lay not in advanced technology, but rather in a carefully planned cinematic trick. Records from the time show how Hollywood and the government were closely linked. Great directors and visual effects experts were consulted, and theories suggest that none other than Stanley Kubrick, the visionary behind 2001, A Space Odyssey, could have played a crucial role in the supposed staging of the moon landing. The idea may seem absurd to some, but when we analyze the political interests involved, everything starts to make more sense. If the United States had lied about landing on the moon, who would it benefit? The government desperately needed a media coup to prove its supremacy. A convincing reenactment would ensure that the narrative was controlled and that the Soviets believed they were one step behind, even if in reality the Americans were still years away from achieving an actual landing. Now, think about it. Since 1969, no other manned mission has been sent to the moon. Why, after supposedly winning that race, did we just stop? Why, in the 21st century, with infinitely more advanced technology, has NASA not yet repeated this feat? If we were able to land safely over 50 years ago, why can't we do the same today? And there are more intriguing details. Some astronauts who participated in the Apollo missions demonstrate strange behavior when questioned about the veracity of the landing. Buzz Aldrin, one of the first men to set foot on the moon, already reacted aggressively when pressured to swear on the Bible that he had actually been there. Neil Armstrong, on the other hand, lived an extremely private life, rarely giving interviews or speaking openly about the mission. If they really accomplished such an extraordinary feat, why don't they talk about it with pride? The American government has been caught lying on several occasions. from secret experiments on innocent citizens to covert military operations, history is full of conspiracies that were only revealed years later. If they lied about so many things, why wouldn't they lie about the space race? Now, I want to hear from you. Could it be possible that this was all one of the biggest hoaxes in history? Do you think the technology of the time really allowed this feat, or did the American government just stage a victory to fool the world? Leave your comment with the word Hidden NASA if you think there is something hidden in this story, or comment Royal Landing. If you believe that man really reached the moon, I want to know your opinion before continuing with the next part of the research, where we will analyze the concrete evidence that raises even more doubts about this historic mission. Now that we understand the context of the space race and the political and strategic interests behind the Apollo 11 mission, it's time to delve into the details that make many people question the veracity of the moon landing. There are inconsistencies in the images, inexplicable flaws in the records, and contradictions in the testimonies. If NASA really accomplished this feat, why are there still so many questions that remain unanswered? Let's start with one of the most debated points: the shadows. In the official photos of the Apollo mission, the moon has no atmosphere, which means that the only source of light in the environment should be the sun. Therefore, all shadows should follow a logical pattern parallel to the ground. However, when analyzing the images released by NASA, we notice that some shadows are at different angles, as if there were multiple lighting sources. This type of effect can only be achieved in an environment where there are artificial reflectors, such as in a recording studio. How can this be explained? Did NASA manipulate the images, or was there really an error in the light exposure? Another detail that raises suspicion is the flag fluttering on the lunar surface. As we all know, the moon has no wind or atmosphere. Therefore, a flag could not move naturally as we see in the videos. Proponents of the official version say this is because the astronauts rotated the flagpole when planting it in the ground, and that the flag's fabric was rigid, with an upper rod to keep it taut. But if this is true, why in some footage does it continue to oscillate even after the astronauts have already moved away? This is a detail that still divides opinions and raises questions. And what to say about the absence of craters under the lunar module? We are talking about a ship that, upon landing, should have generated a strong explosion of dust and excavated a small depression in the ground due to the impact of the engine. However, in images released by NASA, the lunar module appears to have landed extremely delicately, without causing any apparent displacement of dust or creating a visible crater. Furthermore, the module's feet are perfectly clean, with no signs of dust or marks, which is at least strange for an environment where gravity should cause lunar material to accumulate in contact areas. How is it possible for a spacecraft to have landed without causing any disturbance to the ground? Now, let's talk about another point that always raises questions: the sharpness and composition of photos taken on the Apollo mission. Remember? This is 1969. The cameras were completely manual. The astronauts had thick gloves that made adjustments difficult, and the lighting couldn't be controlled. However, NASA's official photos look almost perfect. The composition is impeccable, the focus is precisely adjusted, and the lighting appears to be ideal from all angles. How is it possible that with all the difficulty of operating a camera on the moon, the astronauts were able to take images with such professional quality? And why, among all the photos released, are there no blurry or poorly framed images, something that would be expected in such an extreme situation? And there's one more intriguing detail that many people don't notice at first glance: the complete absence of stars in the lunar sky. The moon has no atmosphere to distort the light, which means the sky should be incredibly starry, without interference from particles that block the view from space. However, in photos from the Apollo mission, the sky is completely black. NASA's Justification for this is that the exposure of the cameras was adjusted to capture the astronauts and the lunar soil, which caused the stars not to appear. But if that were true, how do we explain that in other space images taken on different missions, stars are visible even with similar exposures? Were the records manipulated, or does NASA's technical explanation actually make sense? In addition to the photos, there is another factor that many question: the difficulty NASA had in replicating the technology of the time. If we managed to land on the moon more than 50 years ago, why haven't we done it again with the same ease? Today, we have computers 1,000 times more powerful, much more advanced materials, and highly sophisticated rockets. However, we still hear from NASA itself that returning to the moon remains an extremely complex challenge. What happened to all the knowledge gained on the Apollo mission? And why to this day isn't there original footage of the Apollo 11 mission in high quality? NASA claims the original tapes were reused or lost over the years. How is it possible that humanity's greatest achievement was recorded in a disposable format? Any major historical event on Earth has well-preserved archives. So why did the only definitive proof of man's landing on the moon simply disappear? Now, pay attention to one of the most curious details: the strange behavior of the Apollo astronauts when asked about their experiences on the moon. You'd expect the first people to set foot in another world to speak enthusiastically about the experience, right? But this is not what we see in historical records. At press conferences, astronauts appear uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and giving vague answers. Buzz Aldrin, on several occasions, showed extreme irritation when asked about his trip to the moon. Neil Armstrong, known for his discretion, avoided interviews and rarely spoke about the subject. Why do these men, who should be treated as heroes, not behave as such? All of these points raise questions that cannot be ignored. If the Apollo mission was truly a milestone in human history, why are there so many inconsistencies? Are we facing the biggest conspiracy ever hatched by the United States government? The truth may be right in front of our eyes, but are we willing to see it if all these inconsistencies were not enough to raise doubts? Now we enter the most controversial point of this investigation. What if man's landing on the moon had never happened, and everything was just a meticulously planned cinematic act? Sounds crazy, right? But when we look at the evidence, the connection between NASA, Hollywood, and the entertainment industry may be much deeper than we realize. Let's start with a name that always appears in discussions about this alleged hoax: Stanley Kubrick. If there was ever a director who could create a perfect simulation of a moon landing, it was Kubrick, known for his perfectionism and obsession with details. In 1968, he directed one of the most iconic science fiction films, 2001: A Space Odyssey. A revolutionary production that presented extremely realistic visual effects for the time. What is intriguing is that, shortly after the film's release, NASA managed to carry out the supposed landing on the moon with impressive visual quality by 1969 standards. Coincidence? Or was Kubrick's cinematic knowledge used to create an artificial scenario that convinced the world that the United States had won the space race? Some say that Kubrick was contacted by the government to direct a fake version of the Apollo 11 mission and ensure that everything looked convincing on camera. This theory is strengthened when we analyze the filmmaker's own behavior in the following years. Kubrick was extremely private and rarely spoke about his personal life. But in his later works, there are several hidden messages that many believe are clues to his supposed involvement in the lunar hoax. One of the most famous examples is in the film The Shining. It's from 1980, where the boy Danny wears a sweater with the inscription Apollo 11 USA. Furthermore, there are changes in the film's script that were not in Stephen King's original book, such as the famous scene in which the phrase written on Jack Torrance's typewriter is repeated tirelessly. Some theorists believe this detail represents Kubrick's guilt for repeating the lunar mission lie over the years? And if this performance really happened, where would it have been recorded? There are several speculations about where this secret production may have taken place. Some believe that Area 51, a highly restricted base in the United States, would have been used as a studio for the simulation. Others suggest that filming took place at one of Hollywood's biggest studios, under tight security, with a crew limited to only the most trusted members of the government and film industry. Accounts from former NASA employees indicate that there was a secret division within the agency responsible only for manipulating images and videos to ensure everything was in line with the official narrative. This could explain why the photos taken on the Apollo mission are so impeccable with perfect lighting, cinematic angles, and a quality that is difficult to believe for a time when automatic cameras or digital editing did not exist. Another detail that reinforces this theory is the NASA's own strange behavior when dealing with Apollo mission records. As we already mentioned, the original recordings of the landing simply disappeared from the agency's files, and the justification given is that the tapes were reused to record other data. Now, think about it. Are we talking about humanity's greatest achievement? Something that should be preserved as a historical treasure, and yet NASA accidentally lost the evidence. This doesn't make sense. It was just a clerical error. Why? Didn't they ever release high-quality copies of this footage? Could these tapes actually contain evidence that could expose flaws in the simulation? Furthermore, there is an even more intriguing detail: the leaked documents about the Apollo mission. In recent years, several confidential files from the American government have been made public, and some of them point to millionaire expenditures on audiovisual productions linked to NASA during the 1960s. In one of the documents revealed by Nisa Suze K. Researchers, there are records of contracts signed between the space agency and major Hollywood studios, claiming that the objective was to assist in publicizing the space mission. But what if this assistance was not just in publicity, but in the actual creation of the landing images? Another point that strengthens the conspiracy thesis is testimonials from former employees and military personnel who claim that NASA hides information about its missions. Bill Kaysing, a former analyst who worked for a company that provided services to NASA, published a book claiming that the moon landing never happened and that the videos were all recorded in a studio. He stated that there were several flaws in the mission's records and that the American government created a hoax to ensure its victory in the Cold War. But if all this is true, what does it mean for humanity? If NASA really staged the moon landing, that means we spent decades believing a monumental lie. It means that governments can manipulate history, that science can be used as a tool of control, and that the truth can be something much more fragile than we imagine. The impact of this would not only be on the past, but on everything that is presented to us today as fact. If NASA faked this event, what else could be being covered up? If there is a conspiracy theory that raises doubts about the moon landing, there are also those who argue that everything was real, using evidence presented by NASA itself to refute skeptics' arguments. But is this evidence really enough to end the discussion? Or are there still gaps that fuel doubt? Now, let's look point by point at the arguments used to refute the theory that it was all a hoax. And you can decide for yourself which makes the most sense. One of the first points that NASA uses to refute suspicions involves the issue of shadows and lighting in the landing photos. Those who believe that the Apollo mission was filmed in a studio point out that the shadows of the astronauts and objects on the lunar surface are not parallel, which would indicate the presence of multiple light sources, such as searchlights. However, the official explanation for this is that the lunar terrain is uneven and full of small depressions and elevations, which can make shadows appear distorted depending on the camera angle. Furthermore, the very nature of sunlight, which spreads unevenly as it hits different surfaces, could also create this effect without the need for artificial lighting. But is this explanation convincing enough to rule out the studio hypothesis? Another frequently questioned point is the flying flag. Since the moon has no atmosphere, many wonder how the American flag could wave, as if it were being blown by the wind. NASA argues that the flag was not fluttering, but rather moving due to the force applied by the astronauts when planting it in the ground. Since there is no air resistance, the fabric would have continued to swing for a while before stabilizing. Additionally, the Apollo 11 mission flag had a horizontal rod at the top to keep it taut, which may have created the illusion of movement. However, some videos show the flag moving even when no one is around, which raises doubts about the official explanation. Are we seeing a normal physical effect, or is there something else going on behind the scenes? Another frequently cited argument to validate the moon landing is the fact that other Apollo missions were also sent later, and they all followed the same protocol. Between 1969 and 1972, a total of 6 manned missions landed on the lunar surface. Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. This would mean that NASA would have staged not just one, but 6 full missions involving hundreds of astronauts, engineers, and scientists. For many, this would be a conspiracy so complex that it would be impossible to keep secret for so long. After all, how can we explain the silence of thousands of people who worked on the space program? If it really was all forged, why didn't anyone ever reveal the truth? On the other hand, there are those who believe that the United States government has ways of silencing those who know too much, whether through threats or simple fear of the consequences. Another detail used by NASA to prove that man went to the moon is the existence of objects left on the lunar surface. The Apollo missions reportedly left behind laser beam reflectors, flags, scientific equipment, and even the lunar modules. These reflectors can still be detected today, as they are still used to measure the distance between the Earth and the moon. Scientists shoot laser beams towards these devices and are able to record the time it takes for the light to return. But skeptics argue that these reflectors could have been placed there by unmanned probes, which would not prove human presence. Additionally, Soviet Luna missions and other space explorations also left devices on the lunar surface. So how do we know for sure that these reflectors were actually placed by Apollo astronauts and not by robotic missions? And more importantly, why, after the Apollo 17 mission, did NASA never send a manned mission to the moon again? After all, if we managed to land there with rudimentary technology in 1969, why today, with computers millions of times more advanced, haven't we repeated the feat? Another frequently cited argument is that of the testimonies of the astronauts themselves. Men like Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and other participants in the Apollo missions have always publicly defended that they had actually been to the moon. In several interviews, they reaffirmed their experience, detailing the lunar landscape, the sensation of walking in a low-gravity environment, and the psychological impact of this journey. But there is something strange about it. Why did Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, spend much of his life in seclusion, avoiding interviews and rarely speaking about his experience? What could explain Buzz Aldrin's reluctance to discuss the matter? And even more curious, why did some astronauts show signs of discomfort and aggression when pressured about the mission? There is even an emblematic case in which Buzz Aldrin punched a conspiracy theorist who accused him of lying about going to the moon. If the mission really happened, why would he react with such fury? Wouldn't it be easier to simply ignore these allegations or counter them with solid arguments? For those who believe in the conspiracy theory, this reaction could be a sign that he is hiding something. On the other hand, those who defend the veracity of the mission argue that anyone would lose patience when constantly accused of lying about one of the most important moments of their life. Another point raised by those who believe in the veracity of the moon landing is that, over the decades, several countries have analyzed images from the Apollo mission and never found concrete evidence of fraud. Even Russia, which was the United States' biggest rival in the space race, never officially contested the authenticity of the landing. If there was any clear evidence that the whole thing was faked, wouldn't it be in the Soviet Union's interest to expose this hoax? Russia's silence can be interpreted in two ways. Either they really believed that the U.S. landed on the moon, or perhaps there are secret agreements between governments that prevent certain truths from coming to light. And finally, there is a more technical argument: the samples of lunar rocks brought back by the Apollo missions. Scientists from around the world have already analyzed these samples and confirmed that they have unique characteristics that indicate they really came from the moon. However, skeptics argue that lunar meteorites that fell to Earth could have been used to create this illusion. And there are even reports that some lunar rocks supposedly donated by NASA to other countries were tested and found to be nothing more than common Earth rocks. This raises the question: if the samples are genuine, why were some of them fake? Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that the evidence presented by NASA is enough to end this discussion? Or are there still many unanswered questions? Do you trust the scientific arguments, or do you think there is something being hidden? If you believe that NASA really landed on the moon and the evidence is beyond doubt, comment NASA proved. But if you still think there is something wrong with this story, comment space farce. Let's debate in the comments, because the investigation is far from over. In the next section, we will address a crucial moment. What happens when science encounters resistance? Let's talk about the scientists who challenged the official version and the consequences they suffered for questioning what should be an absolute fact. Stay tuned, because what comes next could be even more revealing. But there is something that no one talks about. What if the real issue isn't the landing, but what NASA might be hiding? For decades, all attention has been on landing man on the moon, but what if the secrets behind the Apollo mission are even more disturbing? Few dare to argue that NASA may have hidden much more than a simple hoax. There are records of missions that disappeared from the archives. Astronauts who returned deeply shaken and classified documents suggesting that the space agency found something on the moon that should never be revealed. Buzz Aldrin himself publicly stated that, during the Apollo 11 mission, foreign objects were spotted near the lunar module. What was seen there? And why has NASA never officially commented on these reports? Most important, why did we never return to the moon after the Apollo 17 mission? Theories suggest the answer could be scary. There are indications that secret NASA missions took place after Apollo, but with different objectives. During this space race, NASA not only wanted to beat the Soviets, but also discover what really existed outside Earth. In several space broadcasts, astronauts made reference to visitors or unwanted company. These audios were quickly silenced, interrupted, or distorted. Now, think about it. If the moon was a huge step for humanity, why don't we ever go back? Why did NASA abandon a site that they said was a historic achievement? What happened between 1969 and 1972 to abruptly end manned missions? And the strangest thing, why are official answers always vague and evasive? Many believe the answer may lie in a highly confidential document known as Project Horizon. This U.S. military plan, created in the 1950s, provided for a permanent base on the moon for strategic and military purposes. Rumor has it that something was found there and that this knowledge was so shocking that it had to be suppressed from history. If this is true, NASA may have found something more than expected. Among the most disturbing theories is the hypothesis that mysterious structures have been detected on the lunar surface. Images suggest geometric patterns and shadows indicating possible constructions, something difficult to explain as mere natural formations. If this is real, the Apollo mission was not just a milestone in space exploration, but an encounter with something that should never be revealed. And it doesn't stop there. Reports indicate that some photos taken during the Apollo missions were edited before being released. But what was removed from these images? Could it be that there was something on the lunar surface that couldn't be shown? There is evidence that several photos were censored before being released to the public. If the moon was just unexplored territory, why hide anything? Another intriguing point are the astronauts who returned changed of their missions. Neil Armstrong stepped away from the spotlight and avoided talking about Apollo 11. Buzz Aldrin occasionally mentioned that something else had been found. Maurice Chatelain, former NASA communications chief, stated that the Apollo missions picked up strange radio signals while on the moon. These signs were never explained and disappeared from official records. Now, we come to a crucial point. If there is something hidden on the moon, who controls that information? NASA may not be acting alone. Many theories suggest greater involvement by the American government in this cover-up, coordinated by secret agencies. Leaked documents mention unexplained encounters and communications between astronauts and the Earth base that were edited or removed of official records. Now, everything connects. NASA may have been just an instrument for a larger goal, and the race to the moon may have been a theater, not just to outwit rivals, but to cover up something much more significant. If there really was something there, something that could change our understanding of the universe, it makes sense that this information would have been manipulated and buried under strict secrecy. But then the big question arises: what was really found on the moon? In the next section, we'll dive even deeper into the secrets of space exploration and the evidence that the moon can be much more than just a natural satellite. What comes next may challenge everything you believe about space. Stay tuned. If humanity faked an event of this magnitude, what else could be a lie? This question echoes in the minds of millions who question the reality around them. If man's landing on the moon was a carefully constructed hoax, how many other narratives were manipulated without us realizing it? The truth is fragile in the hands of those who control the information. Government, NASA, media, they all shape what we call reality. But is this reality authentic, or do we live in a scripted theater? As children, we learn about the glory of the moon landing, the heroic astronauts, and the extraordinary human achievement. But what if this is all a modern fairy tale? A story created to make us believe that we live in a world where the impossible has been overcome. How is it possible that, with technology billions of times more advanced, we have not yet repeated this feat? If we were really there, why don't we ever go back? All attempts at lunar exploration seem to run into inexplicable obstacles. Projects are announced, billions are invested, but no human being has set foot on the moon since 1972. What does NASA know that we don't? History proves that governments and powerful agencies manipulate information to serve their own interests. Political fraud, hidden confidential data. What if the arrival on the moon is just an example of a reality where lies keep people under control? The media plays a crucial role in this game. She presents only what is appropriate, ignoring information that could change our worldview. If the moon landing was staged, how many other lies have we been sold as absolute truths? Our view of space is shaped almost entirely by what NASA puts out. But can we trust blindly? If there was something on the moon that we weren't supposed to know, would NASA reveal it? What if space exploration is more than a scientific journey, a tool for global manipulation? The question is not just about the moon, but about control of information. If NASA found something that could never be revealed, wouldn't it make sense for that truth to be suppressed? Governments hide information for political, economic reasons, or to maintain social order. If the moon hides secrets, it is natural that they will not be disclosed, and the astronauts themselves. Why do they avoid talking about their experiences? Neil Armstrong lived as a recluse. Buzz Aldrin had strange reactions when questioned. If they accomplished one of humanity's greatest feats, why don't they talk about it with pride? What would justify this silence? Maybe the truth is something they can't share. Perhaps there are pacts, threats, something so impactful that it cannot be revealed. Or, who knows, the lie was too big to be sustained for so long. There's something about this story that doesn't add up, and this doubt makes us question not only man's trip to the moon, but the entire information control structure that governs our world. If this story was manipulated, what else was changed? How many times have we been deceived without realizing it? Now, I want to know your opinion. Is NASA hiding something from the public? Have we been conditioned to believe a manipulated narrative? If you feel there is something wrong, comment NASA hides. If you believe that everything happened as they told us, comment Space Truth. We've reached a crucial moment. After analyzing the evidence and theories, the question remains: did man really walk on the moon, or was it all a carefully staged spectacle? If there is one thing that is clear, it is that the information we receive does not always reflect the absolute truth. Whether for political interests or to hide something, there is a veil of mystery surrounding lunar exploration that cannot be ignored. NASA insists that everything happened as reported, presenting photos, videos, and testimonies. But there are still unanswered questions. The absence of stars in the images, the mismatched shadows, the strange behavior of the astronauts, the loss of the original recordings, and, above all, the fact that we never returned to the moon. How? Can we blindly trust this narrative? Why, with all of today's technology, can't we repeat this historic feat? If the Apollo mission was real, why did NASA abandon lunar exploration for decades? Was cost really a determining factor? Or was there something about the moon that we weren't told about? Reports indicate that there are areas of the moon that have never been officially explored but are under constant observation. What could be hidden there? Another intriguing point is the behavior of the Apollo astronauts. Neil Armstrong avoided talking about the subject and lived in seclusion. Buzz Aldrin got angry whenever asked about the mission. Why do these heroes of humanity avoid discussing such a great feat in depth? The silence, the evasion, and even the aggressiveness suggest that there is something more to this story. Now, think. If the moon landing was fabricated, what does that mean for everything we believe about space exploration? If we were deceived about an event of this magnitude, how many other things could have been manipulated? The space race may not have been just a dispute between the USS and the USSR, but a fight for something much bigger, something we still don't fully understand. And I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that the moon landing was real, or was it all just a big theater? If you think there are hidden secrets, comment "The moon hides secrets." If you trust the official version, comment "NASA is right." If this video made you question everything you knew about landing on the moon, then you need to subscribe to the channel right now. Here, we'll continue exploring NASA's hidden mysteries, space conspiracies, and secrets they don't want you to know. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos, because the revelations are just beginning. If you want to discover the truth about space and much more, click the sign up now. The moon may not be the only place with hidden secrets. What if Mars is also involved in something that has never been revealed? Elon Musk and NASA are leading the race to the red planet, but there is information that remains beyond our reach. What is really happening on Mars? In the next video, you will see evidence that could change everything we know about this mission. The truth may be more surprising than we imagine.